Cast. Well, I've had my Facebook page unpublished this week. Was it something I said? It was done about 7 days ago as I record this, with no warning, no run-up, just taken down because I had apparently gone against their rules and regulations, but there was no explanation about how. And they ignored us for virtually a week, asking what's happening, why is this gone on? And then last night, out of the blue, one of our requests was finally answered with the message that the page was being put back because it had been taken down in error. Yeah, and I'm a Cocker Spaniel. And it highlights, again, the power, as I'll come to, a tiny few people have in controlling the information that people receive or don't receive. And this power is being used ever more blatantly to censor information that is challenging the official narrative and emphasizing that which supports the official narrative. People's YouTube channels, Facebook pages, Twitter access is being deleted with increasing extremism, so that this narrative that people receive, from which people's perceptions come, can be controlled. And this has been the plan from the very start. You know, whether people accept it, and more people are, world events, society transforming events, are not random. They're planned in a sequence leading to a goal at the end of it, which is the complete subjugation and control of human society. And so the plan from the start was through the internet, which was created by the military organization, DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon that makes things like death rays. I mean, I'm sure they did it because they cared about the global population being able to communicate with each other freely. Wasn't the idea at all. It was to create a global network of information and communication, which could then, by its technological, digital nature, be centrally controlled, and the flow of information controlled, not in the end even by human intervention, but by algorithms and artificial intelligence, which is what is increasingly happening now. And the plan was to replace newspapers and even the forms and sources of television, etc., that we've had so far, with algorithmically controllable internet forms of communication. And to seize that control, corporations, which became giant corporations like Facebook, and Twitter, and Google, and Google-owned YouTube, were created, or at least taken over, to create this centrally controllable information source. And for a while, it seemed that the internet and all that was happening was a good thing, because we did have the free flow of information. There wasn't censorship. But of course, if you're going to sell something to people and get them addicted to it, get society basically dependent upon it, then you don't reveal it as it's meant to eventually become. You reveal it in a way that people like. Oh yeah, I like this. Say what you like. And then, as these corporations like Facebook and Google have got more and more monopoly power, well, you use us or you don't do it. It's increasingly becoming. Then, once that monopoly power was increasingly getting closer and closer and closer, then they decided, actually, we're not going to have the free flow of information, because actually that was not what it was all about from the start. You asked DARPA. And so we've seen increasingly using made-up excuses the gathering censorship of information that's challenging the official narrative, not just from the perspective I'm coming from, but from almost any perspective, which is getting people, crucially, to question what authority tells them is the truth and is reality. And we now are seeing the demise of newspapers, which, although they've always been manipulating information for political and corporate reasons, they cannot be censored in the way that internet sources can, through algorithms. There at least has to be, most of the time, some kind of discussion, or there can be, into why is this not getting in the paper? Why is that being censored? But with algorithms, it just happens. No debate necessary or increasingly possible. And, I shake my head when I see newspapers and other forms of media calling for, more censorship of this on the internet and more censorship of that. I talk about, turkeys voting for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Or to use another analogy, lambs to the bloody slaughter. Because they are in the gun sights of this censorship. Eventually, or increasingly we're seeing some of it. And not just people like me. Here's a story just from this week from Britain. The House of Lords, one of the two tiers of the British Parliament, unelected, peers, as they call them, deal a blow to plans to protect freedom of press. You do surprise me. Unelected peers eager to muzzle the media last night inflicted a painful blow on plans to protect press freedoms. Following a lengthy and bad-tempered debate, the House of Lords voted for a series of amendments which would curb the media's ability to investigate corruption and other scandals. See, while the mass of the mainstream media is just a propaganda operation for the official version of everything, there are still some real journalists in there who do still do some good journalism on the level of the whole conspiracy that they operate on. And this cabal of censorship and control wants them as well. So it really is about time that the genuine alternative media and the genuine mainstream media started to talk to each other and come together to resist this as one unit instead of divide and rule, where the mainstream media thinks the demise of the alternative media and its suppression is a good thing because of all the traffic and audience that the alternative media has taken from the mainstream in recent years. Because this is something that is not only not going away, it's not going to stay at the level it is now. This censorship is designed eventually to become total. I'll give you an example, talking of the topical story about my Facebook page being unpublished for nearly a week. Algorithms have been used to suppress how my information circulates around the internet in the most obvious ways. The following support for my Facebook page was going through the roof, month after month after month, climbing and climbing and climbing rapidly. It got up into nearly 800,000 people on the page. And then, overnight, virtually, some years ago, that stopped. And when they unpublished the page a week ago, the numbers supporting the page were about the same, just slightly less than there were years ago when this algorithmic intervention began. Suddenly, kind of almost overnight, instead of getting hundreds and thousands of responses to information that I've posted, it was in the tens often because of this algorithmic censorship. The people that wanted to see the information through the page were simply not getting it. And I have used Facebook on the basis of using the system to expose the system. I've actually somehow, don't know how I managed it, I've resisted the need and the temptation to take a picture of me dinner every time I eat and let everyone know. I've used the platform, if you like, to expose what's going on from the network that actually controls the platform, ultimately. And that has been fine up to this point where the decision was made, we've got to stop this information circulating, and now it's becoming more and more difficult. This video, when it goes on YouTube, its circulation numbers will be suppressed because of its content. Talk to anyone around the alternative media and they'll tell you the same. There is a war on alternative information because the system is terrified of it. And like I say, the number of people that now control vast, vast swathes of information that people receive or don't receive, that impacts itself on the nature of human discourse and fundamentally impacts itself upon human perception, which comes from the information that people receive. The small number of people that are controlling that is extraordinary. Just go through a few numbers. First of all, depending on what source you look at, it's reckoned there's about 15 million Jewish people in the world out of a population of 7.5 billion. Now, significant numbers, very significant numbers of those Jewish people, that 15 million, will not only not support Zionism, which is a political philosophy, not a race, let's not forget, but they vehemently oppose it. We've had the American Rabbi Shapiro, saying that Israel is not the Jewish people and Zionism is an assault on his religion. So Zionism and Jewish people are not the same thing. But the manipulators want to make the public believe they are the same thing, so anyone questions and challenges and exposes Zionism and its agenda is automatically a racist because they're blaming Jewish people for everything. Well, here's someone who's not. You know why? Because it's not true. Then you have a large number of that 15 million who support Zionism, but on the basis that they support the existence of Israel and what goes with it. But they are not aware of the actions and the agenda of what I call the ultra-Zionists, the big-time extremists, people like Netanyahu and his mentality, who are running an agenda not for the benefit of Jewish people. They're just expendable to them as much as anyone else is. But an agenda that benefits the 1%, as they've been called. So you're looking then at 15 million people in a world of 7.5 billion. You're looking at a significant number of them who oppose Zionism, a much larger number who support Zionism but not in awareness of what the ultra extremists within it are doing and to what end. And that leaves a tiny few ultra-Zionist zealots who are the ones that I'm talking about. And it's not just them. They're just part of this global web of manipulation that includes people from all backgrounds in the end. So let's just look at this small number. Okay, never mind the small number. Let's take 15 million. Let's take that figure as a whole. Out of this tiny number of 15 million people in a world of 7.5 billion, five of them have control of the flows of information that come through Google, comes through Google-owned YouTube, and comes through Facebook. Out of that tiny number, we have, at Facebook, we have that giant corporation run by Mark Zuckerberg and his chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg. At Google, we have the creators and controllers, well, at least on one level, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. And at Google-owned YouTube, the CEO is another Zionist called Susan Wojcicki, who is the sister of the former wife of the Google founder, Sergey Brin. So there you have 5 people who can dictate the rules and regulations on the basis of what is seen on YouTube, what is seen on Facebook, and the nature of the search engine emphasis and suppression of information that goes on with Google. And not only that, these corporations are also hiring ultra-Zionist hate groups who set out to get the public to hate their targets, hence I call them hate groups, like the Anti-Defamation League, and in Britain, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, the CAA, that works so hard to have my public events banned. They are being hired by these same companies to advise on what should and should not be censored. The CAA was created out of nowhere with private funding in the midst of the mass murder and slaughter of Palestinians, civilians and children in 2014 with the state-of-the-art weapon attacks on Gaza. It was created amid that to mitigate the appalling public relations image, understandably, of Israel at that time. And within no time, the CAA was walking the corridors of power, meeting people like Theresa May. And why did that come about? Freedom of information documents have shown how close this CAA is to the police, and particularly the police that are involved in so-called hate crime. And these are the organizations with total allegiance to Israel, who are being hired by these companies controlled by people with allegiance to Israel to advise them on what should and should not be censored. And this is what they are desperate for people not to realize. Why does anyone think that Israel has this network of ultra-Zionist hate groups around the world dedicated to silencing people who expose things like this and expose Israel for its real agenda in terms of its regime, by dubbing them anti-Semitic and racist? It's not to protect Jewish people from racism. It's to protect Israel from legitimate investigation and exposure. And where is the mainstream media in all this? Why aren't they exposing this? I know they're running for the hills and running home to their mum, crying for their dollies. Well, that's politically incorrect, isn't it? I don't know. What a situation we're in. And we need to face it. So the other point in all this is there are connections from Google and Facebook and these other internet giants to the CIA and to this organization, DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon. And one of the expressions of this is all the information, personal information and data that once would have required the intelligence community to get a court order, at least officially, to glean. And now people all over the world are giving these agencies, through Facebook, through Google and these other organizations, the very same data and more for nothing, by telling the world everything about themselves. This so-called social media, it's just bringing people together, is a surveillance and information gathering operation on a global scale the world has never seen before. And another part of this is the effect that it's having on human discourse and the psychological state of people that use these so-called platforms. Many former investors, executives, and so on of Facebook have come out in recent times pointing out the catastrophic effects, not least psychologically, on people that the Facebook communication system creates. And they're saying now, of course, they've made their bloody millions and billions from Facebook, but now they're saying, well, no, it's a problem. Well, it is a problem. And one of the things that's pointed out is this brain chemical called dopamine, which is something that is related to the feeling of pleasure. And it's also connected to addictive drugs, because when you take those, you have an increase in dopamine production. It is in itself a drug if it gets out of hand. For instance, if you have too much of it, it can trigger things like schizophrenia. And what's happening is this Facebook situation is creating addicts to Facebook. The same with Twitter. Addictions. How? Because, and by the way, some of these executives and former investors that have come out and criticized Facebook have said that the addicting people to it was the idea from the start. And part of that addiction is the dopamine rush that many people get from getting a like or getting a nice comment. And once you start getting addicted to that, you want to go back and you want more. So you become addicted to Facebook. And another thing comes from this. If you want nice comments and likes and all this stuff, then you've got to tell people what most people will agree with. So you'll get the like. And this is where virtue signaling and a lot of that stuff comes from. And what this means is you are getting people to say what the majority agree with, just to get this feedback. And this is part of the creation of the hive mind, the hive opinions, the hive perceptions that are destroying the diversity, not only of communication, but the diversity of even thought, opinion. Add to that the abuse and the intimidation of those that challenge this hive perception. And you've got a situation of carrot and stick, pushing people into this tiny area of perception, which suits the state, might suit the state as well, but it suits the state in terms of what it wants people to believe, because then it's dictating what people perceive. And one of these people that was connected to Facebook who's come out is a guy called, if I can find him, Roger McNamee. And he has set out 8 things that he says need to be done to sort this out. Well, they're good, but more than this is required. And these are the 8 things, he says, to sort Facebook out. And indeed, he's talking about social media as a whole, really. Number 1, banning bots that impersonate humans. Now, you would think, if you were interested in the free flow of information and the non-manipulation of that information, that not having bots that weren't human but were claiming to be would be an absolute gimme. No discussion necessary, really. But this is how much of the manipulation of human perception goes on now, through AI. That these platforms, as he calls them, should stop making acquisitions. Because, people say, well, if you don't want to use Facebook, we'll use Instagram, owned by Facebook. Well, there's WhatsApp, owned by Facebook. And he's saying platforms should stop making acquisitions until they assess damage caused. They should be transparent about who is behind political and issue-based communication. They should be transparent about their use of algorithms. If we knew how they were using them, I mean, they admit they're using them, but if we saw the truth of the scale and the reasons they're using them, people would be absolutely shocked to the core. He says they should be required to have a more equitable contractual relationship with the users, because the users are just fodder to make money out of, and fodder to feed perceptions to. Oh no, we care about our users. Yes, sure you do, Mr. T-shirt. There should be a limit on the commercial exploitation of consumer data by internet platforms. Consumers, another word, consumers. We're not consumers. We're human beings. Beyond that, we're consciousness, not consumers. Anyway, people, not the platforms, should own the data. That should be a gimme, shouldn't it? Your creativity that you post on their platforms and suddenly they own it, or at least part own it. What? And number 8, increasing awareness of the threat posed by platform monopolies, which is what this videocast is about today, pointing out that obvious danger and that obvious fact. But the thing is, much as, there's some good stuff in that, Facebook, and those who really control Facebook beyond the T-shirt, and Google, etc., and YouTube, they don't want to be fixed. That's not the idea. What's happening is what was meant to happen from the start. So when Zuckerberg comes out and says in 2018 we're going to fix Facebook, you're going to fix Facebook in terms of what needs to happen to make it a fair, just and decent form of communication. What he calls fixing Facebook is using excuses like stopping fake news to further and more in a more extreme way censor information the state doesn't want people to see. That's what that's really about. And there's a court case going on at the moment with a former employee of Google who is making great revelations about the way that company works, and I'm sure all the others will be the same, where you are marginalized if you have a different political opinion to what Google reckons you should have, what the brand opinion is. You see, this is a story this week with Virgin Trains, Richard Branson, saying they're going to stop selling the Daily Mail because they don't agree with its opinions. This is all the same thing that I'm talking about here. So Google, according to this former employee in the court case, is looking at employees based on their political opinions. And not only does that destroy your career at Google if you speak your truth, but in the tech industry in general, because it's all connected. And this is what really it's all based upon. It's based on fear and intimidation to silence people. And, we shouldn't forget that if anyone doesn't have freedom of speech, it doesn't mean freedom to say what everyone else agrees with. It's freedom to speak. And then we'll have a debate about the opinions instead of silencing them. If anyone doesn't have freedom of speech, then no one has it. Because if people have their freedom of opinion silenced, everyone else's opinion is not freedom of opinion. It's freedom to conform with what is acceptable to that which has the power to silence those they disagree with. And, there's some of us who won't shut up about this, because there's some of us